The day everything changed, I never thought I would be the kind of man who judges people by their appearance. I was raised better than that. My mother, God rest her soul, always told me that character matters more than credentials, that kindness weighs more than cash. But somewhere between building my empire and losing myself in the intoxicating rush of success, I forgot those lessons. I became exactly the kind of person I once despised. And it took losing everything that mattered to remember who I was supposed to be. My name is Marcus Wellington, and I'm the CEO of Wellington Tech Industries. At least that's what my business cards say. What they don't say is that I'm a widower, a father barely holding on, and a man who almost destroyed the one miracle that walked into his life when he needed it most. This story begins on a Tuesday morning in late September, one of those crisp autumn days in Connecticut when the leaves are just starting to turn and there's a hint of winter in the air. I remember the date exactly because it was 3 months after my wife Caroline died, and I was still counting the days like a prisoner marking time on a cell wall. September 24th, the day I met Grace. I was running late that morning, which wasn't unusual. Since Caroline's death, I'd been running late to everything except work. Work was the only place where things made sense anymore, where spreadsheets and quarterly reports didn't ask me how I was feeling or look at me with those pitying eyes that made me want to scream. My 6-month-old son, Thomas, had been up half the night crying, and I'd stumbled through the darkness trying to warm bottles and change diapers, tasks that Caroline had made look effortless, but that left me feeling incompetent and exhausted. The nanny agency had sent me 3 candidates in the past month. The first one lasted 2 days before I fired her for letting Thomas cry for what I deemed too long. The second made it almost a week before I caught her on her phone while Thomas was in his playpen, and I showed her the door immediately. The third one quit after I snapped at her for rearranging Caroline's carefully organized nursery. I knew I was being impossible, but I couldn't seem to stop myself. Everything felt wrong without Caroline. Everything felt like a betrayal of her memory. Mrs. Henderson, the woman who ran the nanny agency, had called me the week before with exasperation clear in her voice. "Mr. Wellington, I'm going to be frank with you. You're developing a reputation. Good nannies talk to each other and word gets around. You need to be more reasonable in your expectations." I'd bristled at that. "I'm paying top dollar for childcare. I don't think expecting someone to actually pay attention to my son is unreasonable." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Wellington, I've been in this business for 30 years. I know grief when I see it affecting someone's judgment. I'm going to send you one more candidate, but I'm going to ask you to really give this one a chance. Will you do that?" Something in her tone made me pause. "Fine, send her over. It's not a her, actually." "Well, it is, but—" Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat. "Grace Davis is one of the most experienced nannies I've ever worked with. 23 years in childcare, impeccable references, CPR certified, first aid trained, early childhood education degree. She's been working with a family in Boston for the past 8 years, but they're relocating to London and Grace doesn't want to leave the States. She's looking for a live-in position." "Fine, when can she start?" "There's something I need to tell you first, Mr. Wellington. Grace is— well, she's not what you might be expecting based on your previous requirements." I remembered frowning at the phone. "What does that mean?" "It means that if you're the kind of employer who cares more about appearances than qualifications, this won't work. But if you're willing to look past your preconceptions and see the remarkable woman Grace is, then you might just find exactly what you and your son need." I should have asked more questions. I should have pressed for details. But I was exhausted, and Thomas was crying in the background, and I just wanted someone competent to take care of my son so I could go to work and pretend my life wasn't falling apart. "Just send her," I said. "Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. That was how Grace Davis came into my life. Or rather, that's how I almost missed the blessing she would become. I was in my home office that Tuesday morning on a conference call with our Tokyo partners when the doorbell rang. I heard my housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, answer it, heard the murmur of voices in the foyer. I was barely paying attention, focused on the numbers being presented on my laptop screen when Mrs. Chen knocked on my office door. "Mr. Wellington, the new nanny is here." I held up a finger, muted my microphone. "I'll be out in 10 minutes, have her wait in the living room." 20 minutes later, I finally wrapped up the call and headed toward the living room. I was still looking at my phone, scrolling through emails when I walked in. "Sorry for the wait, I'm Marcus Wellington and you must be." I looked up and stopped mid-sentence. The woman standing in my living room was not what I had expected, not at all. She was black, for one thing, which shouldn't have mattered but which I registered with surprise because the agency had never sent me a black nanny before. She was older, probably in her late 50s or early 60s, with silver threading through her dark hair which was pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a simple navy dress and comfortable shoes, and she carried herself with a quiet dignity that was immediately apparent. But what really threw me was the way she looked at me. There was no nervousness in her eyes, no eagerness to please. She simply looked at me the way someone might look at an interesting painting in a museum, with attention and assessment, but no particular need for approval. "Grace Davis," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Wellington." Her handshake was firm and warm. I found myself fumbling for words, which was unusual for me. I was a man who commanded boardrooms, who negotiated million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. But something about this woman's calm presence knocked me off balance. "Right, yes, Mrs. Henderson spoke highly of you. She's very kind." Grace's eyes moved past me, taking in the room. "You have a beautiful home." It was beautiful. Caroline and I had bought this house 5 years ago, a sprawling colonial in one of Connecticut's most exclusive neighborhoods. 12,000 square feet of marble floors and crown molding, a chef's kitchen that Caroline never got to cook in, a nursery she decorated with such love and care. A monument to everything we'd built together, now feeling like a mausoleum. "Thank you, my wife," I caught myself. "My late wife chose most of the decor. I'm very sorry for your loss." And the way she said it, there was no pity in it, just simple recognition of pain. "Mrs. Henderson mentioned that you lost your wife recently." 3 months ago. I didn't elaborate, I never did. Grace nodded. "And you have a 6-month-old son, Thomas, if I remember correctly." "Yes, he's upstairs with Mrs. Chen, probably about ready for his morning bottle." I glanced at my watch. "I should warn you, he's been difficult lately, crying a lot, fussy. The doctor says there's nothing wrong with him, but he's grieving too," Grace said quietly. "Babies feel everything, Mr. Wellington. They may not understand death, but they understand absence. They understand when the world has changed." Something about those words hit me like a punch to the chest. I turned away, pretending to look for something on the bookshelf. "Yes, well, do you want to see him? I'd love to meet him, but first, if I may, I'd like to ask you a few questions." I turned back to her, surprised. "Don't you mean I should ask you questions? This is a job interview." A small smile touched her lips. "It is. But it's also me interviewing you, Mr. Wellington. I need to know if this is a good fit for me as well. I've been doing this work for a very long time, and I've learned that the employer-employee relationship only works if there's mutual respect and clear communication." I felt a flash of irritation. I wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone I was considering hiring. "I see, and what would you like to know? What are your expectations for a nanny? What does success look like to you in this role?" I thought about it. "Someone who takes excellent care of my son, someone who follows my instructions and maintains the routines my wife established, someone reliable and professional." Grace was quiet for a moment. "And what about someone who loves your son, who sees him as a whole person, not just a set of tasks to complete?" who might sometimes challenge your instructions if she believes there's a better way to meet Thomas's needs. I felt my jaw tighten. I'm his father, I know what's best for him. Of course you are, and of course you do, Grace said, and there was no condescension in her voice, just gentle firmness. But grief can cloud our judgment sometimes, Mr. Wellington. It can make us rigid when we need to be flexible. It can make us hold on too tight when we need to let go a little. A good nanny doesn't just take care of the child, she takes care of the whole family. And sometimes that means speaking difficult truths with love. I should have ended the interview right there. I should have thanked her for her time and called Mrs. Henderson to send someone else. Someone younger, someone less presumptuous, someone who wouldn't look at me with those knowing eyes and see straight through to all the cracks I was trying to hide. But I didn't, because somewhere deep down in a place I wasn't ready to acknowledge, I recognized that this woman was exactly what I needed, even if she wasn't what I wanted. Would you like to meet Thomas now? I asked instead. We went upstairs to the nursery. Mrs. Chen was there trying to soothe a crying Thomas. The moment we walked in, Grace's entire demeanor changed. Her face softened, her movements became fluid and purposeful. She approached Mrs. Chen with a warm smile. "May I?" she asked, holding out her arms. Mrs. Chen looked relieved and handed Thomas over. The baby was red-faced and hiccuping from crying, his little fists balled up in frustration. Grace took him gently, settling him against her shoulder with practiced ease. She began to hum some tune I didn't recognize and started swaying in a slow, rhythmic motion. "There now," she murmured. "There now, little one, I know it's hard, everything is so different, isn't it? But you're safe, you're loved, it's going to be okay." Thomas's cries began to quiet. His little body, which had been so tense, started to relax against her. Within 2 minutes, he was calm, making soft, cooing sounds against her shoulder. I felt something twist in my chest. Jealousy, maybe, or inadequacy. I'd been trying for 3 months to comfort my son the way Grace had just done in 2 minutes, and I'd never quite managed it. "You're a natural," Mrs. Chen said admiringly. Grace smiled. 23 years of practice, though I'll tell you a secret, every baby is different. What works for one might not work for another. You have to learn to listen to what they're telling you. She turned to face me, still holding Thomas, who was now looking up at her with wide, curious eyes. "He's beautiful, Mr. Wellington. He has your nose and chin, but I see his mother in those eyes." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Caroline's eyes, that same deep brown, almost black in certain lights, the only part of her I had left. "I'd like to offer you the position," I heard myself say. "Mrs. Henderson mentioned you're looking for a live-in arrangement. We have a suite on the 3rd floor that would be yours. The salary is—" I named a figure that would have made most people's eyes widen, but Grace just nodded calmly. "That's generous, but I need to be clear about something before I accept, Mr. Wellington." "What's that?" "I don't just work for a paycheck. I care for children because I love them, because I believe it's my calling. If I come here, I will love your son like he's my own. I will fight for what's best for him, even if that sometimes means disagreeing with you. I will not be pushed around or dismissed, and I will not tolerate disrespect. Mrs. Henderson told me about your previous nannies. I understand you're grieving, and I'm sorry for that. But if you hire me, you need to be willing to trust me and work with me, not against me. Can you do that?" It was the most anyone had challenged me in months. My board members didn't challenge me. My employees didn't challenge me. My friends, what few I had left, tiptoed around me like I was made of glass. And here was this woman I just met, laying down conditions like she was the one offering me a job instead of the other way around. I should have been offended. Instead, I felt something like relief. "I can try," I said. Grace studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Then I accept. When would you like me to start?" "How about today?" she smiled. "Today it is." That was 4 weeks ago. 4 weeks that changed everything, though I didn't know it at the time. 4 weeks before the day I almost destroyed the best thing that had happened to my son since Caroline died. In those first weeks, Grace moved through my house like she'd always been there. She brought order to chaos, routine to randomness. She woke with Thomas for his early morning feeding, which meant I actually got sleep for the first time in months. She established a schedule that somehow managed to be both structured and flexible, naps at regular intervals, but adjusted if Thomas was particularly fussy or engaged in play. She sang to him, read to him, took him on long walks in his stroller through the neighborhood. And slowly, day by day, my son began to transform. The constant crying that had become the soundtrack of my life began to quiet. Thomas started smiling again, real smiles, not just gas, and the sound of his laughter, which I'd almost forgotten, began to fill the house once more. I told myself I was grateful. I told myself I appreciated what Grace was doing. But the truth was more complicated than that. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being replaced. Every milestone Grace witnessed, the first time Thomas rolled over on his own, the way he'd started reaching for toys with more coordination, felt like something being stolen from me. Caroline should have been there to see these things. I should have been there. Instead, it was Grace, this stranger who'd waltzed into our lives and made herself indispensable in a matter of weeks. I found myself becoming critical of small things. The way she'd rearranged the bottles in the kitchen. The new lullabies she sang instead of the ones Caroline had chosen. The fact that Thomas seemed to calm down faster for her than he did for me. I never said anything directly. I wasn't that obvious about it, but I'd make little comments, dropping them like small stones into still water, watching the ripples spread. Caroline always warmed the bottles to exactly 98 degrees. Those aren't the books my wife bought for the nursery. He seems to be napping at different times than what's on the schedule. Grace would look at me with those steady, knowing eyes and simply nod. I'll keep that in mind, Mr. Wellington. But she didn't change what she was doing, and Thomas kept thriving. It drove me crazy. My mother would have been ashamed of me. She'd raised me to be better than this. Growing up, we didn't have much. My father left when I was 8, and my mother worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. But she taught me that every person deserves dignity and respect, regardless of their race, their background, or their station in life. She would have loved Grace, would have recognized in her the same strength and wisdom she possessed. But I'd spent the last 15 years in a world where I was always the smartest person in the room, always the one in control. I'd built a tech company from nothing, had made my first million by 30 and my first 100 million by 40. I'd married a woman from one of Connecticut's oldest families, had become exactly the kind of success story people write articles about. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be the kid whose clothes didn't quite fit right, whose skin color sometimes made people's smiles a little more fixed, a little less genuine. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be dismissed or underestimated, until I started doing it to someone else. The breaking point came on a Friday evening in October. I'd had a brutal day at work. One of our major investors was threatening to pull out, and I'd spent 8 hours in emergency meetings trying to salvage the deal. I was exhausted, frustrated, and spoiling for a fight when I walked through the door at 7:30. The house was quiet, too quiet. Thomas should have been having his evening bottle, should have been in his bouncer in the kitchen where I could see him when I came home. Instead, there was no sign of either him or Grace. I found Mrs. Chen in the kitchen, preparing dinner. "Where are they?" She looked up, startled by my tone. "Mr. Wellington, where is who?" "Grace and Thomas, where are they?" "Oh, I believe Grace took him for a walk. She said something about the fresh air being good for him before bedtime." I felt anger spike through me, hot and irrational. It's almost 8 o'clock. He should be starting his bedtime routine, not out walking around the neighborhood. Mrs. Chen's expression became carefully neutral. "I'm sure Miss Grace knows what she's doing. She's very good with him." I was pacing now, checking my watch every 30 seconds. 8 o'clock came and went. 8:15, 8:30. Where were they? What could possibly be taking so long? The neighborhood was safe, but still, Thomas was only 6 months old. Anything could happen. At 8:40, I heard the front door open. I was in the foyer before Grace had even gotten the stroller through the doorway. "Where have you been?" The words came out sharper than I'd intended. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" Grace looked at me calmly, closing the door behind her and beginning to unstrap Thomas from the stroller. My son was fast asleep, his cheeks pink from the cool evening air. We went for a walk, the weather was beautiful and Thomas was fussy. The motion helps him settle. His bedtime routine starts at 7:30, it's almost 9 o'clock. "I'm aware of the time, Mr. Wellington." She lifted Thomas gently from the stroller, cradling him against her shoulder. But he was overstimulated from a busy day, and the schedule needed to be adjusted. "He fell asleep about 20 minutes ago, which means he'll sleep better tonight than if I'd forced him through the usual routine when he wasn't ready for it. You can't just change things without consulting me. I'm his father." Something flickered in Grace's eyes. "You are. And as his father, you should want what's best for him, not what's most convenient for your schedule." The words hit like a slap. "Excuse me, Thomas is not a machine, Mr. Wellington. He's a baby who lost his mother. Some days he needs more comfort than others. Some days the schedule works perfectly. Other days we need to be flexible. Good parenting, good caregiving is about responding to his needs, not rigidly adhering to a timetable." I was so angry I could barely see straight. Who did she think she was, lecturing me about parenting, about my own son? "I don't pay you to make those kinds of decisions," I said coldly. "I pay you to follow my instructions." Grace was quiet for a long moment. Thomas stirred against her shoulder, making a small sound, and she automatically began to pat his back in soothing circles. The gesture was so natural, so full of care that it made my anger burn even hotter. "Is that what you think this is?" she asked softly. "That you pay me, so I should just do whatever you say, whether it's good for Thomas or not? I think I'm his father and you're his employee, and there needs to be clear boundaries about who makes the decisions." "I see." Grace's voice was carefully controlled. "Then let me be clear about my boundaries, Mr. Wellington. I will not compromise Thomas's well-being to satisfy your need for control. I will not follow instructions that I believe are harmful, even if they come from you. And I will not stay in a position where I'm treated as less than a partner in caring for this child." "A partner?" I laughed, and it was an ugly sound. "You've been here 4 weeks, you're his nanny, not his mother." As soon as the words left my mouth, I regretted them. I saw the hurt flash across Grace's face before she schooled her expression back to neutrality, but the damage was done. "You're right," she said quietly. "I'm not his mother." His mother was a remarkable woman who would be heartbroken to see how her husband is using his grief as an excuse to be cruel to someone who loves her son. The truth of that statement made me want to lash out even more. "You don't know anything about my wife. I know she organized the nursery with care because she wanted Thomas to have a peaceful, loving environment. I know she chose books that would stimulate his development. I know she planned every detail of his care because she loved him more than anything. I see her love in every corner of this house, Mr. Wellington, and I know she wouldn't want her son being raised by a father too consumed with control and grief to actually see what that son needs. Get out." The words were out before I could stop them. Grace didn't flinch. "Are you firing me?" Was I? I was so angry, so hurt, so tired of feeling like I was failing at everything. Thomas had stopped fussing. Thomas was sleeping through the night. Thomas was hitting all his milestones, and I couldn't take any credit for it because Grace had done it all, had stepped in and made it look easy when I'd been drowning. "I'm telling you to leave me alone with my son." Grace looked at me for a long moment. Then she crossed to where I stood and gently transferred Thomas into my arms. He stirred briefly, then settled against my chest, his warm weight familiar and foreign at the same time. "He needs to be changed and put in his sleep sack," Grace said quietly. "His bottle is in the warmer if he wakes up hungry. I'll be in my room if you need me." She walked away, leaving me standing in the foyer holding my sleeping son, feeling like the worst person in the world. I carried Thomas upstairs, moving carefully so I wouldn't wake him. In the nursery, Caroline's carefully designed nursery that Grace had somehow made even more functional and loving, I laid him on the changing table and went through the motions. Fresh diaper, sleep sack, the mobile that played Twinkle Twinkle Little Star in soft, tinkling notes. Thomas woke briefly and looked up at me with those eyes, Caroline's eyes, and I felt something in me crack open. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry, buddy. I'm really trying." He yawned, already drifting back to sleep, trusting me completely even though I felt like I didn't deserve that trust. I stood there for a long time watching him breathe, trying to figure out how I'd become this person. The person who'd hurt someone who'd done nothing but help us. The person who'd let pride and fear and grief turn him into someone my mother wouldn't recognize. The person Caroline wouldn't have wanted me to be. I should have gone to Grace's room right then. I should have apologized, should have admitted I was wrong. But I didn't. I was too proud, too afraid of showing vulnerability. So I went to my own room instead, telling myself I'd deal with it in the morning. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the bed I'd shared with Caroline in the room that still smelled faintly of her perfume, and I thought about all the ways I was failing. Failing as a father, failing as an employer, failing as a man. By the time morning came, I'd almost convinced myself to apologize. But when I went downstairs, Grace was already there feeding Thomas his breakfast, and she looked at me with such professional distance that I felt my pride kick back in. "Good morning, Mr. Wellington," she said politely. "Good morning." I poured myself coffee, not looking at her. "I'm going into the office early today. I'll be home late." "Of course, we'll be fine." That was it. No emotion, no warmth. Just professional courtesy, like I was a stranger passing through instead of someone who shared this house with her, whose son she cared for every day. I should have been relieved. Instead, I felt hollow. The next week was more of the same. Grace was perfectly professional, perfectly competent. She took care of Thomas with the same dedication as before, but there was a wall between us now that hadn't been there before. She said, "Mr. Wellington," instead of occasionally calling me Marcus. She didn't make small talk or tell me about Thomas's day unless I specifically asked. She was doing exactly what I'd accused her of not doing, treating this like just a job, and I hated it. My mother used to say that pride was the devil's favorite sin because it was the hardest one to see in yourself. I was living proof of that. By the following Friday, I'd almost worked up the nerve to apologize. I came home early, planning to ask Grace if we could talk. But when I walked through the door, I heard something that stopped me in my tracks. Laughter, Thomas's laughter, bright and delighted, coming from the living room. I walked quietly to the doorway and looked in. Grace was on the floor with Thomas, playing peek-a-boo with a blanket. Every time she popped her face out from behind it, Thomas would shriek with joy, his whole body wiggling with excitement. Grace was laughing too, her face transformed from the careful neutrality she showed me into pure delight. "There he is," she was saying. "There's my sweet boy, such a smart baby." "Yes, you are." Something about the scene made my chest tight. This was what I'd been missing. This was what work had robbed me of, what my grief had blinded me to. These moments of joy, of connection, of life continuing even in the face of loss. I must have made a sound because Grace looked up and saw me. Immediately her expression shifted. The warmth drained away, replaced by polite professionalism. "Mr. Wellington, I didn't hear you come in." She stood, picking up Thomas, who was still giggling. "It's almost time for his nap. I'll take him upstairs." "Grace, wait." She paused, not quite looking at me. "Yes." This was my chance. This was where I should apologize, should admit I'd been wrong, should thank her for everything she'd done. But standing there in my expensive suit, looking at this woman who'd given my son back his laughter, I felt the weight of every assumption I'd made, every small slight I'd delivered, every way I'd tried to maintain control by keeping her at a distance. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't bridge that gap I'd created. "Never mind," I said. "Carry on." She nodded and left, taking Thomas with her. I stood in the empty living room, surrounded by all the material success I'd accumulated, and I'd never felt more alone. That night, I did something I hadn't done since Caroline died. I went into the study and pulled out the photo albums from the top shelf. Pictures of our wedding, of our honeymoon in Italy, of Caroline pregnant and glowing with happiness. The last photos, the ones from the hospital after Thomas was born, Caroline holding him for the first time with an expression of pure love on her face. I touched her face in the photograph. "I don't know how to do this without you," I whispered. "I don't know how to be both of us." Of course, there was no answer. There was never going to be an answer. Caroline was gone, and I was going to have to figure out how to live in this new reality, whether I was ready for it or not. I was still sitting there, surrounded by memories, when Mrs. Chen knocked softly on the door frame. "Mr. Wellington, I'm sorry to disturb you, but I thought you should know. Miss Grace's light is on. I think she's packing." My head snapped up. "What?" Mrs. Chen looked troubled. "I saw her carrying boxes into her room. I think she might be planning to leave." The possibility hit me like ice water. Grace leaving. Thomas losing another person who loved him. Our house going back to chaos and grief, and my complete inability to hold things together. "No," I said, standing up. "No, she can't." I was halfway to the stairs when I stopped. What was I going to do, order her to stay? Hadn't I just spent the last week treating her like an inconvenient employee instead of the blessing she'd been? I thought about my mother again, about the lessons she'd tried to teach me. About the man Caroline had fallen in love with, the man who'd fought his way out of poverty not by stepping on others but by lifting them up, by building something that created opportunities for people. When had I lost that man? When had I become someone who valued control over connection, pride over humility? I went upstairs, but I didn't go to Grace's room. Instead, I went to the nursery where Thomas was sleeping peacefully. I stood over his crib, watching his little chest rise and fall, and I thought about what kind of father I wanted to be. What kind of man I wanted him to see when he looked at me. And I knew what I had to do. I didn't sleep again that night. I spent the dark hours pacing my room, rehearsing what I would say to Grace in the morning, trying to find words that would adequately convey how sorry I was without sounding like I was making excuses. By the time dawn broke over the Connecticut hills, I had the speech prepared in my head. Humble, honest, no justifications, just acknowledgement of my failures. But when morning came and I went downstairs, Grace's door was closed and her car, an older sedan that looked well maintained but had definitely seen better days, was gone from the driveway. Mrs. Chen was in the kitchen, looking worried. She left early this morning. She took Thomas with her. My first reaction was panic. She took him where? She said she was taking him to his pediatrician appointment. It was on the calendar. Mrs. Chen showed me the schedule posted on the refrigerator. Sure enough, there it was. Thomas Dr. Patterson 9:00 a.m. I'd completely forgot. Caroline had made this appointment months ago, a 6-month checkup and vaccination schedule. Of course Grace would remember. Grace remembered everything. I checked my watch, 8:15. The pediatrician's office was 20 minutes away. I had time to get there, to talk to Grace, to finally say what needed to be said. I made it to Dr. Patterson's office by 8:50. The waiting room was decorated with cheerful murals of animals, and there were several other parents there with their children. And in the corner, in one of the comfortable chairs, sat Grace with Thomas on her lap, reading to him from a board book about trucks. She looked up when I walked in, and I saw surprise flicker across her face before she masked it. Thomas saw me and immediately held out his arms, making his happy babbling sound. "Dada dada." It was the first time he'd really said anything that sounded like dada. I felt my throat close up as I crossed to them and took him from Grace's arms. He grabbed my tie immediately, his favorite toy, whenever I held him, and grinned up at me. "Mr. Wellington," Grace said carefully, "I wasn't expecting you. I wanted to be here." I looked at her, still holding Thomas. "Can we talk?" After the appointment, something uncertain crossed her face. I'm not sure that's a good idea. Please, the word felt rusty coming out like I'd forgotten how to ask instead of command. Please, Grace, I need to talk to you. Before she could answer, the nurse called Thomas's name. The appointment took about 45 minutes. Dr. Patterson was pleased with Thomas's development. He was hitting all his milestones, gaining weight appropriately, responding to stimuli the way he should. The vaccines made him cry, which made my chest ache, but Grace was there with a bottle, soothing him within minutes. Through it all, Dr. Patterson kept directing questions to both of us, assuming we were together. And how are Mom and Dad managing the sleep schedule? Are you both managing to get enough rest? It should have been awkward, but I found I didn't want to correct her assumption. There was something almost comforting about being seen as a unit, as partners in this parenting journey, even if it was based on a misunderstanding. Afterward, in the parking lot, Grace moved toward her car with Thomas. I followed. Grace, please, just 10 minutes. She stopped, her hand on her car door. Thomas was drowsy against her shoulder, the post-vaccine fussiness settling into exhaustion. Mr. Wellington, Marcus, please call me Marcus. She looked at me for a long moment. I don't think that's appropriate. Why not? Because I've been treating you like you're beneath me. Because I've been using your professional title while you use mine, maintaining this distance that lets me pretend I'm superior. The words came out in a rush. You're right, it's not appropriate. None of this has been appropriate. The way I've treated you, the way I've dismissed your expertise and your care, the things I said last Friday, none of it was appropriate. Grace shifted Thomas to her other shoulder. Are you apologizing, or are you angry at me for pointing out the truth? I'm apologizing, I'm trying to apologize. I ran my hand through my hair, frustrated with myself. I'm doing a terrible job of it because I'm out of practice. When you're the CEO of a successful company, people don't often point out when you're wrong. They just smile and nod and do what you want. It's made me forget how to be humble, how to admit when I've messed up. A small sound from Thomas made us both look down. He was asleep now, his little face relaxed and peaceful against Grace's shoulder. There's a coffee shop across the street, Grace said quietly. We could talk there, let him sleep in the stroller. 10 minutes later, we were seated at a corner table with our coffees, black for me with cream and 2 sugars for Grace, and Thomas in his stroller between us, sleeping soundly despite the gentle buzz of conversation around us. I didn't know where to start, so I just started talking. My mother would have loved you, I said. She would have recognized in you all the things she tried to teach me: dignity, strength, the kind of wisdom that comes from lived experience. She raised me by herself after my father left, worked 2 jobs to keep us fed and housed. She was a housekeeper for a family in Hartford, and I remember going to work with her sometimes during the summers. This big house, not unlike the one I live in now. And I remember how the family treated her. Polite but distant, grateful for her work but never quite seeing her as a whole person with her own hopes and dreams and intelligence. I looked at Grace. I swore I'd never treat anyone that way, but that's exactly what I've done to you, isn't it? Grace was quiet, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. Why? She asked finally. What changed? Mrs. Henderson told me about your background. She said you built your company from nothing, that you understood what it meant to struggle. So what happened? It was the question I'd been asking myself all night. Success happened, money happened, I married into a family that opened doors my mother could never have imagined. I started surrounding myself with people who looked like me, talked like me, expected the same things from the world that I did. And somewhere in all of that, I forgot where I came from. I forgot what it felt like to be underestimated and dismissed. I took a breath, and then Caroline died and I was drowning. Everything I'd built felt meaningless. My company, my money, my house, none of it could save her. None of it could bring her back, and I was left with this baby who needed things I didn't know how to give, and I felt like such a failure. And then I came along, Grace said softly, and made it look easy. Yes, the admission hurt. You walked into my house and within days Thomas was better, happier. You knew exactly what he needed, exactly how to comfort him. You were everything I wasn't. And instead of being grateful, I resented you for it. Grace was quiet for a moment. Do you know why I'm good at this work, Marcus? It was the first time she'd used my first name, and it sent a little jolt through me. Because I've been doing it for 23 years, she continued. Because I've raised dozens of children, learned from my mistakes, developed instincts and skills through experience. You've been a father for 6 months, and you've been a single father for half of that while also running a company and grieving your wife. You're not failing, Marcus, you're learning, there's a difference. But I hurt you. I needed her to understand this. What I said last Friday about you not being his mother was true, Grace said. I'm not his mother, I never will be, but I love him like he's mine. That's what I do, Marcus. I give my whole heart to the children I care for, knowing that eventually I'll have to let them go. That's the job. It's more than a job. Yes, it is. She looked at Thomas, sleeping peacefully. When I started doing this work, I was young and newly married. My husband and I, we wanted children desperately. We tried for years. Doctors, treatments, prayers, nothing worked. We were going to adopt, had started the process when my husband had a heart attack. He was only 31 years old. Gone just like that. I hadn't known. Mrs. Henderson hadn't mentioned it. I'm so sorry, I said. Grace nodded, accepting the condolence. After he died, I couldn't bear to continue with the adoption. It felt wrong doing it alone when we'd planned it together, so I became a nanny instead. I thought I'd do it for a year or two while I figured out my life. That was 23 years ago. She smiled, but there was sorrow in it. I never had my own children, but I've loved so many. I've seen them take their first steps, heard their first words. I've nursed them through illnesses, celebrated their birthdays, taught them to read and tie their shoes. And then when they don't need me anymore, I move on to the next family, the next child who needs loving. That must be heartbreaking, I said, having to leave them. It is every single time. Grace looked at me directly. But it's also beautiful, because I get to be part of these crucial early years. I get to help shape these little people into who they're going to become. I get to love them when they need it most. That's a gift, Marcus, a painful, beautiful gift. I thought about Caroline, about how much she would have liked Grace, how she would have recognized a kindred spirit, someone who understood that love wasn't about possession but about service, about showing up every day and doing the work even when it was hard. I don't want you to leave, I said. Thomas needs you. I stopped, surprised by what I'd almost said. We need you, both of us, and I'm begging for you to give me another chance, to let me prove that I can be better than I've been. Grace studied me for a long moment. What would be different? Everything. I'll listen when you tell me Thomas needs something different than what the schedule says. I'll trust your expertise instead of questioning it. I'll treat you like the professional you are, like the blessing you've been to my family. I'll stop, Grace said gently. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. It was the first time she'd touched me beyond a handshake, and the gesture was so full of compassion that I felt my eyes burn. Those are all good things, she said, but that's not what I need to hear. What I need to know is that you see me, Marcus, not as the help, not as an employee, not even as Thomas's nanny, though I am all those things. I need to know that you see me as a person. As someone with value beyond what I can do for you. The words hit home. You're right, I haven't been seeing you. I've been seeing a function, a role, not Grace Davis, the woman who lost her husband too young and turned her grief into a gift for other people's children. Not the person who hums old spirituals to my son and makes him laugh with peek-a-boo and loves him enough to fight with his father when she thinks he needs protecting. I took a breath. I see you now, Grace. I'm ashamed it took me this long, but I'm asking you to stay anyway, to give me a chance to be the kind of man my mother raised me to be, the kind of man Caroline married, the kind of father Thomas deserves. Grace was quiet for so long I thought she was going to refuse. Then she squeezed my hand gently and let go. I wasn't really packing to leave, she said. I was reorganizing my room. Mrs. Chen jumped to conclusions. Relief flooded through me so intensely it made me dizzy. So you'll stay. I'll stay on one condition. Anything. You stop working so much. Thomas needs his father, not just his nanny. He needs you to be present, Marcus, not just physically in the house but actually there, playing with him, feeding him, putting him to bed, learning to read his cues the way I have. Can you do that? It would mean delegating more at work. It would mean trusting my team to handle things I usually controlled personally. It would mean being vulnerable and potentially incompetent at something, at least at first. Yes, I said, I can do that. Grace smiled and it transformed her whole face. Good, then let's go home. The next few weeks were different. I made good on my promise to Grace, leaving work earlier, spending more time with Thomas. At first, it was awkward. I'd forgotten how to just be with him without feeling like I was failing at every turn. But Grace was patient, showing me little tricks she'd learned over the years. How to hold him during tummy time to make it more enjoyable, the exact rhythm of the bouncing that would make him laugh, the way to read his tired signals before he got overtired and cranky. You're a natural, she said one evening as I successfully got Thomas down for bed after only 15 minutes of fussing. I had a good teacher. It was true. Grace taught not by lecturing but by example, by gently offering suggestions instead of criticism. Have you tried holding him like this? Sometimes it helps if you hum while you rock him. He seems to like it when you talk to him about your day. That last suggestion had felt silly at first. What did a 6-month-old care about quarterly reports and board meetings? But Grace insisted, and I found she was right. Thomas would look up at me with those serious eyes while I talked about my day, processing the tone of my voice if not the words themselves. It became our ritual. I'd hold him after dinner and just talk about everything and nothing, and he'd listen like what I was saying was the most important thing in the world. Grace and I fell into an easy partnership. She'd get Thomas up and handle the morning routine while I showered and got ready for work. I'd come down and have breakfast with them before heading to the office. I started coming home for lunch twice a week, just to see them, to be part of Thomas's day instead of a stranger who showed up after bedtime. Grace would have him ready for his afternoon playtime, and I'd spend an hour on the floor with him, building block towers for him to knock down, making silly faces that would make him giggle. Mrs. Chen noticed the change. "The house feels alive again," she told me one morning. Like it did before. Well, before, she was right. There was laughter in the halls again, Thomas's delighted shrieks when Grace played peekaboo. My own voice less tight and controlled as I sang off-key lullabies at bedtime. Even Grace seemed different, more relaxed, more willing to share stories about her other families, the children she'd cared for over the years. One Saturday afternoon in late October, Grace was off visiting a friend and it was just me and Thomas. I'd been looking forward to it all week, this chance to prove to myself that I could handle a full day with my son on my own. We did pretty well, actually. Breakfast went smoothly. The morning nap happened on schedule. We played, we read books, we went for a walk. I was feeling pretty confident when my phone rang around 2 in the afternoon. It was my brother-in-law, Caroline's younger brother, Jeremy. "Marcus, how are you doing?" "Jeremy, I'm good, just spending the day with Thomas." "That's great, that's great." There was something off in Jeremy's voice, a forced cheerfulness that set off alarm bells. "Listen, I was hoping I could swing by. There's something I'd like to discuss with you." "Now's not really a good time, Thomas is. It won't take long, I'm actually already in your neighborhood, I'll be there in 5 minutes. He hung up before I could protest. I looked at Thomas, who was in his bouncer, contentedly gumming a teething ring. "Your Uncle Jeremy's coming over," I told him. This should be interesting. I hadn't seen much of Caroline's family since the funeral. Her parents had come by a few times in the first month, bringing casseroles and pitying looks, but their visits had tapered off. I'd gotten the impression they didn't quite know what to do with me now that Caroline was gone. I was no longer the brilliant match their daughter had made, the self-made man who joined their social circle. I was just the widower, the sad reminder of what they'd lost. Jeremy showed up exactly 5 minutes later, driving his Tesla and wearing what I recognized as a $1,000 sweater. He hugged me at the door, one of those quick, backslapping, masculine hugs that conveyed nothing. Marcus, good to see you, and there's my nephew. He crossed to Thomas but made no move to pick him up. Jeremy had never been comfortable with babies. He's getting so big. He's doing really well actually. That's good, that's good. Jeremy was looking around the living room, taking everything in. Listen, Marcus, I wanted to talk to you about something, about Thomas's care. I felt myself tense. What about it? Well, Mom and Dad are worried. They've been thinking about how hard this must be for you raising a baby on your own while running your company. They wanted me to feel you out about possibly hiring more help, or, he paused. They were wondering if you'd considered letting them take Thomas for a while. Just temporarily, you understand, until you get back on your feet. The words hung in the air like ice. Get back on my feet. You know what I mean, you're grieving, you're overwhelmed. They thought maybe having Thomas stay with them for a few months, maybe longer, would give you time to heal, to figure out your life. I have figured out my life. Thomas is my life. Jeremy held up his hands. I'm not saying you're a bad father, no one's saying that, but be realistic, Marcus. You're a single dad with a demanding career. Thomas needs stability, needs a family unit. Mom and Dad can provide that. They've raised 4 kids, they know what they're doing. And I don't. I didn't say that. You implied it. I was working hard to keep my voice level. Thomas was watching us, sensing the tension. Jeremy, I appreciate your parents' concern, but Thomas is fine, more than fine, he's thriving. With hired help though, right? Jeremy glanced toward the stairs. That nanny Caroline's friend recommended. What was her name? Grace. Right, Grace. Look, I'm sure she's perfectly competent, but is that really the environment you want Thomas growing up in? Being raised by staff. The dismissive way he said staff made my jaw clench. Grace isn't just staff, what was she? An employee, yes, but also so much more than that. A partner in raising Thomas. A teacher showing me how to be the father my son needed. Someone who'd brought light back into our dark house. She's been a godsend, I finished. Thomas loves her and she's been incredible for him, for both of us. Jeremy's expression shifted, became more calculating. Marcus, I'm going to be straight with you. There's been talk in the family about whether it's appropriate for you to have this woman living in your house. I stared at him. Appropriate? She's Thomas's nanny. She lives in the third-floor suite, completely separate from the family quarters. What exactly are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm just saying that appearances matter, especially in our circles. A single man and a woman living under the same roof, people talk. Let them talk. I was furious now. I don't care what narrow-minded gossips in your country club think about my household arrangements. It's not just the living situation. Jeremy's voice dropped. Mom told me she called last week and this Grace person answered your phone. She said you were busy with Thomas, that she'd have you call back. Mom felt like she was being screened by the help. Grace was being protective of our time together. I'd asked not to be interrupted during Thomas's bedtime routine. See, that's exactly the problem. This woman is making decisions about who gets to talk to you when you see your son. That's not a nanny's role, Marcus. That's more like, well, it's overstepping boundaries. I looked at Jeremy, at his expensive clothes and his carefully styled hair and his practiced concern, and I saw him clearly for the first time. Saw the subtle condescension in his eyes, the assumption that Grace was somehow less than because she worked for a living instead of living off a trust fund. Saw the same dismissive attitude I'd shown her when she first arrived. And I hated it, hated seeing that reflection of who I'd been. I think you should leave, I said quietly. Marcus, I'm just trying to help. No, you're not. You're trying to convince me that I'm failing, that I need to hand my son over to your parents because I can't handle being his father. And you're insulting someone who's been nothing but dedicated to Thomas's well-being. So I'm asking you to leave. Now, Jeremy stood, his expression hardening. You're making a mistake. Caroline would want Thomas to be with family. I am his family, and Grace, I stopped, surprised by what I was about to say. Grace is more family to us than people who show up to judge and criticize. After Jeremy left, I sat on the couch with Thomas in my lap, my heart racing. The confrontation had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. Not because I doubted my decision to keep Thomas with me, I didn't, not for a second, but because I'd seen clearly what I'd been doing to Grace. The same dismissal, the same condescension, the same reduction of a whole person to nothing more than their role. When Grace came home that evening, I told her about Jeremy's visit. I watched her face carefully as I described his concerns, his implications. "They think I'm overstepping," she said when I finished. "It wasn't a question. They think a lot of things, all of them wrong." I paused. "But Grace, I need you to know something. You're not overstepping. You're not just the help. You're part of this family. You're part of Thomas's life in a way that matters. And I'm sorry if I haven't made that clear before." Something shifted in her expression. "Marcus, let me finish, please." I took a breath. "I told Jeremy that you were more family to us than people who only show up to criticize, and I meant it. I know I don't have the right to ask this given how I treated you at first, but I'm asking anyway. Will you stay not just as Thomas's nanny but as part of our family?" Grace was quiet for a long moment. "Do you know what you're asking?" "I think so. I don't think you do." She sat down across from me. "If I'm family, Marcus, that means I get a voice in decisions. It means I can disagree with you when I think you're wrong. It means I stop being deferential and start being honest, even when it's uncomfortable. It means we're partners in raising Thomas, not employer and employee. Can you handle that?" I thought about it, really thought about it. Giving up that control, that hierarchy that had made me feel safe even when it was suffocating. Admitting that I needed help, that I couldn't do this alone. "Yes," I said, "I can handle that. I want that." Grace smiled, and it was warm and real. "Then yes, I'll stay as family." That night after Thomas was asleep, Grace and I sat in the living room and talked for hours, really talked for the first time. She told me about growing up in Georgia, about her parents who'd worked in the textile mills and made sure all their children got educated. About meeting her husband in college, how they'd been so sure they had all the time in the world. About the ache that never quite went away, the space in her heart that would always belong to him. I told her about my mother, about watching her work herself to exhaustion to give me opportunities. About the scholarship that got me into MIT, the startup I founded in my dorm room that eventually became Wellington Tech. About Caroline, how she'd seen something in me beyond the money and success, how she'd made me believe I could be more than just the kid from Hartford who got lucky. "She sounds like she was remarkable," Grace said. "She was, and she would have liked you, would have seen in you what I was too proud and stupid to see." "You're not stupid, Marcus, you were grieving. Grief makes us protect ourselves in strange ways sometimes. That's generous. Most people would just call it being an asshole." Grace laughed, a warm sound that filled the room. "Well, maybe a little bit of both." We talked until midnight, until we both realized we'd be exhausted in the morning when Thomas woke up at his usual 6 a.m. As Grace headed upstairs to her room, she paused on the landing. "Marcus, thank you for seeing me. It means more than you know. Thank you for not giving up on us." After she was gone, I sat in the quiet house and felt something I hadn't felt since Caroline died. Hope. The sense that maybe, just maybe, we were going to be okay. I had no idea how soon that hope would be tested. The next month was the best I'd had since Caroline's death. Grace and I settled into our new dynamic, less employer and employee, more co-parents figuring things out together. We had disagreements, sure. I'd want to rush Thomas to the doctor over what Grace recognized as normal baby fussiness. She'd want to introduce solid foods when I thought he was too young, and we'd have long discussions about pediatric guidelines and trusting the process. But we worked through it, and more importantly, Thomas thrived. He was 7 months old now, sitting up on his own, babbling constantly, developing the beginnings of a personality that was equal parts Caroline's thoughtfulness and my stubbornness. He loved music. Grace's singing made him light up like nothing else. He was starting to pull himself up on furniture, getting ready to crawl. Every day brought something new, some little milestone that filled me with joy and terror in equal measure. Work was going well too. I'd promoted my COO to handle more day-to-day operations, freeing me up to focus on strategy and spending more time at home. The company had weathered the investor crisis and was actually performing better than expected. Everything was coming together. Then came the Monday that changed everything. I had an emergency board meeting that morning, nothing serious, just some last-minute paperwork for a new deal, and I'd left early around 6:30. Grace was already up with Thomas, and I'd kissed his fuzzy head goodbye before heading out. The meeting ran long, as these things always did. It was almost noon by the time I pulled into my driveway, looking forward to lunch with Grace and Thomas, when I saw the cars. My mother-in-law's Mercedes, Jeremy's Tesla, two other vehicles I didn't immediately recognize. Something cold settled in my stomach as I walked through the front door. The scene in my living room was surreal. Caroline's mother, Patricia, sat in the armchair like a queen holding court. Jeremy stood by the fireplace. Two other people, a man and a woman I didn't know, both in business attire, sat on the couch with briefcases open on the coffee table. And Grace stood in the corner, holding Thomas, her face carefully blank but her eyes betraying her distress. "What's going on?" I asked. Patricia stood. "Marcus, good, we've been waiting for you." "Waiting for me in my own house?" I looked at Grace. "Are you okay?" She nodded, but I could see she was shaken. "We have some concerns," Patricia said, "about Thomas's welfare." The cold in my stomach turned to ice. "His welfare? Thomas is fine, more than fine. Is he?" The woman on the couch stood, extending her hand. "Mr. Wellington, I'm Sharon Martinez from Child Protective Services. We received a report about the living situation here." I stared at her. "A report? What kind of report?" "That your son is being primarily cared for by someone with no family connection while you work long hours and maintain what might be considered an inappropriate relationship with the caregiver." I turned to Patricia and Jeremy. "You called CPS on me. On your own grandson." Patricia had the grace to look uncomfortable, but Jeremy's expression was defiant. "We're concerned, Marcus. This situation isn't healthy for Thomas. He should be with family." "I am his family." The words came out louder than I intended, and Thomas started to fuss. Grace immediately began soothing him, swaying gently and murmuring soft words. "Mr. Wellington," the male investigator said, standing as well. "I'm David Chen, also with CPS. I want to assure you that this is just a preliminary investigation. We need to ask some questions, assess the home environment, ensure that Thomas is in a safe and appropriate living situation." Of course he's in a safe situation. He's in his own home with his father and his nanny. "About that," Sharon Martinez said, glancing at Grace. "How long has Ms. Davis been employed here?" "Almost 2 months. And she lives in the home?" "Yes, in the third-floor suite. It's a standard live-in nanny arrangement." "I see." Sharon was writing something down. "And can you describe the nature of your relationship with Ms. Davis?" I felt anger surge through me. "The nature of our relationship? She takes care of my son. We work together to raise him. She's been a blessing to this family." "So you would describe the relationship as professional?" "I would describe it as none of your damn business." I caught myself, forced my voice to stay level. "Grace is Thomas's nanny. She's excellent at her job. My son is healthy, happy, and loved. I don't understand what the problem is." "The problem," Patricia interjected, "is that this woman has far too much influence over Thomas. She makes decisions about his care without consulting family. She's overstepped her role." I turned on her. "Her role is caring for Thomas, which she does better than anyone I've ever seen. And since when do you care about being consulted? You haven't visited in over a month." "We've been giving you space to grieve," Patricia said, her voice tight. "But clearly that was a mistake. Marcus, be reasonable. Thomas needs a proper family environment. My husband and I have the means to provide that. We can take him, give him the stability he needs." "No." The word came out flat and final. "Thomas stays with me." Mr. Wellington, David Chen said calmly, no one is suggesting removing Thomas from your custody. We're just here to assess the situation, ensure everything is appropriate. Then assess away. You'll find a happy, healthy 7-month-old baby who is loved and well cared for. For the next hour, I endured the most humiliating experience of my life. The CPS investigators went through my house with clipboards taking notes. They checked the nursery, examined the safety measures, looked through the kitchen and bathroom. They asked invasive questions about my work schedule, my relationship with Caroline's family, my financial situation. Through it all, Grace stood quietly holding Thomas. I wanted to go to her to comfort her, but I was being interrogated in one room while she was in another, and I hated that they'd separated us. Finally, Sharon Martinez came back to the living room where I waited with Patricia and Jeremy. Grace had been taken upstairs with David Chen. Mr. Wellington, I need to ask you some direct questions and I need honest answers. Fine, what is the exact nature of your relationship with Grace Davis? I've told you she's Thomas's nanny. You live together in this house. She has her own separate living space, but you share meals together, spend time together outside of childcare duties. I saw where this was going and felt sick. Sometimes, yes, we're both involved in raising Thomas. We talk about his development, his needs. We've become friends. Just friends. The implication in her tone made me want to scream. Yes, just friends. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm trying to understand the household dynamic. The dynamic is that I'm a widowed father trying to raise my son with the help of an experienced professional nanny who has gone above and beyond her job description to help us heal. That's the dynamic. Sharon made another note. I see. And does it concern you that others might perceive this arrangement differently? Others meaning Caroline's family who want to take custody of Thomas. She didn't answer that, just kept writing. When they finally left 2 hours later, I felt like I'd been put through a shredder. They'd found nothing wrong, how could they? The house was immaculate, Thomas was clearly well cared for, all the safety measures were in place. But Sharon Martinez had been clear, they'd be monitoring the situation, checking in, making sure everything stayed appropriate. After Patricia and Jeremy left, without apology, without even saying goodbye to Thomas, I found Grace in the nursery. She was changing Thomas's diaper, her movements mechanical. Grace, she didn't look up. I'm sorry. Sorry for what? For causing problems, for making them suspicious. I should have been more careful about boundaries. I crossed the room and gently took her shoulders, turning her to face me. Grace Davis, you listen to me. You have done nothing wrong, nothing. You have loved and cared for my son like he's your own. You've helped us both heal. If anyone should be apologizing, it's me for not protecting you from this. Her eyes were shiny with unshed tears. They think there's something inappropriate happening, that I'm taking advantage somehow. They're wrong and will prove them wrong. But even as I said it, I felt doubt creeping in. Not about Grace, never about Grace, but about what this investigation might mean. What Caroline's family might do if they were determined to take Thomas. What did they ask you? I asked gently. Everything about my duties, my schedule, where I sleep, how much time we spend together. They asked about you, whether you're attentive to Thomas, whether you seem stressed or overwhelmed. Whether, she paused, whether what? Whether our relationship ever becomes physical or romantic. I felt anger surge again. What did you tell them? The truth. That you're a devoted father who's doing everything he can for his son, that our relationship is professional and appropriate, that I've never seen you be anything but loving with Thomas. She took a shaky breath. But Marcus, they didn't believe me. I could see it in their eyes. They think I'm covering for something. I wanted to put my arms around her, to comfort her the way she'd comforted me and Thomas so many times. But I was suddenly, painfully aware that any gesture of affection could be misconstrued, could be used against us. This was what Patricia and Jeremy had done. They'd made me afraid to show gratitude to someone who deserved it. They'd poisoned something good and pure with their suspicions. We'll get through this, I said instead. I'll call my lawyer tomorrow. We'll figure out what we need to do to protect Thomas and prove that this is a healthy, appropriate home. Grace nodded, but she looked defeated in a way I'd never seen before. Maybe I should go, maybe it would be better if I wasn't here if you hired someone else. No, the word came out fierce. No, Grace, you're not going anywhere. Your family, remember, we don't abandon family just because things get hard. That night, after Thomas was asleep, I called my lawyer. Richard Chen, no relation to our housekeeper or the CPS investigator, though he joked about having a common surname, had handled all my business contracts for years. He listened without interrupting as I explained the situation. This is delicate, he said when I finished. CPS has broad discretion in these cases. The fact that they found nothing wrong is good, but if Caroline's family keeps pushing, keeps making reports, can they really take Thomas? In theory. If they could prove you were an unfit parent, yes. But from what you've described, you're far from unfit. The problem is perception, Marcus. The optics of a wealthy widower with a live-in nanny, especially given the age and race dynamics at play. I felt my stomach turn. The race dynamics, are you saying? I'm saying that we live in a world where biases exist, and those biases can influence how people perceive situations. A black woman working in a white household, questions about appropriate boundaries. It plays into ugly stereotypes that shouldn't matter but sometimes do. I thought about my mother, about the family she'd worked for in Hartford, about the careful line she'd had to walk, being professional but not too familiar, helpful but not presumptuous, about all the ways the world had judged her for doing honest work to support her son. And here I was, allowing the same thing to happen to Grace. So what do I do? Document everything. Keep detailed records of Thomas's care, his development, your involvement as a father. Get statements from Thomas's pediatrician, from neighbors, from anyone who can vouch for the home environment. And Marcus, be very careful about how you interact with Grace. I'm not saying you're doing anything wrong, but you need to be aware that every interaction could be scrutinized. After I hung up, I sat in my study for a long time, trying to process everything. My phone buzzed, a text from Jeremy. This doesn't have to be a fight. Mom and Dad just want what's best for Thomas. Let them help. I stared at the message, anger and disbelief warring inside me. They'd called CPS, had tried to make me look like an unfit parent, and now they wanted to frame it as help. I typed and deleted 3 different responses before finally settling on, Thomas is my son. He stays with me. Please don't contact me again unless you're ready to apologize. I didn't expect a response, and I didn't get one. The next few weeks were tense. Sharon Martinez called twice to check in, asking invasive questions about our routine, about Grace's role in the household. I was scrupulously careful in my answers, always professional, always emphasizing the appropriate nature of our relationship. But the investigation was taking its toll on Grace. She became more withdrawn, more careful. The easy warmth between us cooled. She called me Mr. Wellington again instead of Marcus. She stopped joining me for dinner, preferring to eat in her room. When I tried to talk to her about it, she just smiled sadly and said she was trying to maintain appropriate boundaries. I hated it. Hated how something good had been twisted into something we had to defend. Hated that people who claimed to care about Thomas were making his home feel like a prison. Thomas noticed the change too. He was fussier, clinging to Grace even more than usual. At night, he'd wake up crying, and it would take longer to soothe him. It was like he could feel the tension, the fear that hung over us all. 3 weeks after the CPS visit, I came home early from work to find Grace in the living room with Thomas, packing a diaper bag. What's going on? She looked up, and I could see she'd been crying. Patricia called. She said if I brought Thomas to her house for a visit, she'd drop the CPS complaint. She said it would prove you're willing to cooperate, willing to let family be involved. I felt cold all over. And you believe her? I don't know what to believe anymore, Marcus, but I know this investigation is hurting Thomas. I can see it in him. Maybe if we give her what she wants. No, I crossed to her, gently taking the diaper bag from her hands. Grace, listen to me. This is manipulation. If we give in now, she'll just ask for more. A visit becomes a weekend. A weekend becomes a week. Before we know it, she's petitioning for custody and using our cooperation as evidence that we knew Thomas would be better off with her. But what if she's right? Grace's voice broke. What if I am the problem? What if Thomas would be better off without me here? I did something then that I'd been carefully avoiding for weeks. I pulled Grace into a hug, holding her while she cried against my shoulder. You listen to me, I said fiercely. You are not the problem, you are the solution. You've given my son his smile back. You've taught me how to be the father he needs. You've brought life back into this house. Don't you dare let them make you doubt that. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. But the investigation will find nothing because there's nothing to find. We're doing everything right, Grace. We're raising a happy, healthy child in a loving home. That's all that matters. Is it? She looked at me with those knowing eyes. Marcus, be honest. If I weren't black, would any of this be happening? Would Patricia and Jeremy be so quick to assume something inappropriate? Would CPS be so interested in our dynamic? The question hung in the air between us. I wanted to say yes, that race had nothing to do with it, that this was just about protective grandparents and unfortunate misunderstandings, but I'd be lying. No, I said quietly, probably not, and I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry that you have to deal with that kind of prejudice on top of everything else. I'm sorry that I was part of that problem when you first came here, and I'm sorry that I can't protect you from it now. Grace was quiet for a moment, then she said something that surprised me. Do you know what I see when I look at Thomas? I shook my head. I see hope. I see a little boy who's going to grow up in a different world than the one I grew up in. Not a perfect world, no such thing exists, but a better one. Because he has a father who's willing to fight for what's right even when it's hard, who's willing to admit when he's wrong and change, who sees people, really sees them instead of just seeing what he expects to see. She smiled through her tears. Thomas is going to grow up knowing that Grace, his nanny who loved him, mattered, that she wasn't just the help but family. And maybe when he's older, when he has his own family, he'll remember that. He'll treat people with that same dignity. And that matters, Marcus. That changes things one person at a time. I felt my own eyes burn. I don't deserve you. Nobody deserves anybody. We just get lucky sometimes. She squeezed my hand. I'm not going anywhere. If Patricia wants a fight, we'll give her one. That's when I heard it, a sound from the foyer, footsteps. We both turned to see Patricia standing in the doorway, her face pale. Behind her was Sharon Martinez from CPS, looking uncomfortable. How long have you been there? I demanded. Patricia didn't answer. She was staring at Grace, at our clasped hands, at the obvious emotion between us. I came to pick up Thomas for the visit, she said finally. The door was unlocked. I let myself in. The visit isn't happening, I said firmly, and you need to leave my house. I heard what she said. Patricia was still looking at Grace, about seeing hope in Thomas, about him growing up differently. So you can add it to your list of complaints. I was so angry I was shaking. Go ahead, tell CPS that we had an emotional conversation about raising my son to be a good person. See how far that gets you. But Patricia wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Grace with an expression I couldn't quite read. Caroline said something similar once, Patricia said quietly. When she first brought you home, Marcus, my husband was less than welcoming. He had ideas about who our daughter should marry, and a scholarship kid from Hartford with no family connections, wasn't it? Caroline and I had a terrible fight about it. She took a shaky breath. She told me that she saw hope in you, that you were going to change things one person at a time, that loving you, building a life with you that mattered more than any of our prejudices or expectations. I stared at her, speechless. I'd forgotten that, Patricia continued. After she died, I was so angry. At the universe, at God, at you for not being able to save her. When I saw you with this woman, saw how much influence she had over Thomas, I told myself I was protecting my grandson. But really, She stopped, composing herself. Really, I was just angry that someone else could make him smile when my daughter couldn't. Sharon Martinez cleared her throat. Mrs. Wellington, perhaps we should. No. Patricia held up a hand. I need to say this. She looked at Grace. I'm sorry. I made assumptions about you based on nothing but my own prejudices and pain. I called CPS because I was jealous that you could comfort my grandson when I couldn't. Because I wanted to believe you were doing something wrong so I could feel justified in trying to take him. That was cruel and unfair. Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I understand loss, Mrs. Wellington. I understand how it can make you do things you wouldn't normally do. And I understand wanting to protect what's left of the person you love. But I almost destroyed what Caroline would have wanted, Patricia said. She chose you, Marcus. She trusted you to raise Thomas, and she would have loved you, she said to Grace. She would have seen what I was too blind to see, that you're exactly what Thomas needs. She turned to Sharon Martinez. I'm withdrawing my complaint. There's no issue here except an old woman's grief making her foolish. Sharon looked between us all, then nodded slowly. I'll file the paperwork. Mr. Wellington, Ms. Davis, I apologize for the intrusion. It's clear that Thomas is well cared for. After they left, the three of us, Grace, Thomas, and I, stood in the quiet house. Thomas was making happy babbling sounds, reaching for Grace's necklace. Did that really just happen? Grace asked. I think so. Your mother-in-law just apologized to me. She did, and withdrew the CPS complaint, apparently. Grace started laughing, a slightly hysterical sound that made Thomas giggle in response. This is the strangest job I've ever had. Still think of it as a job. She looked at me, and something passed between us. Something that had been building for weeks, something I'd been too afraid to acknowledge because of how it might look, what people might think. No, she said softly. I stopped thinking of it as a job a long time ago. I took a step closer. Grace, don't. She held up a hand. Don't say anything you might regret. Don't confuse gratitude with something else. Don't, I love you. The words hung in the air between us. Thomas cooed, oblivious to the significance of the moment. Marcus, I love you, I said again. Not because you take care of Thomas, though you do that beautifully. Not because you brought light back into this house, though you did. Not because you helped me learn to be a better father, a better person, though you've done that too. I love you because you're Grace. Because you're strong and wise and funny. Because you see the best in people even when they don't deserve it. Because you made me want to be worthy of my son, worthy of the legacy Caroline left. Grace's eyes were shining with tears. I'm 60 years old. I know, you're 43. I'm aware. People will talk. Let them. It's too soon. Caroline's only been gone 6 months. I know that too, and I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow or even next year. I'm just asking you to know how I feel. To know that when I look at you, I don't see my employee or even just my friend. I see someone I could build a life with, someone I could love. You already have a life with someone you love, Grace said gently, touching my chest where my heart was. You have Caroline, she'll always be part of you. I know, and I wouldn't want it any other way, but Grace, she's gone, and I'm still here, and so are you, and so is Thomas. And we could keep pretending that this is just a professional arrangement, that what we have is nothing more than mutual respect and shared duty, or we could be honest about what's happening. Grace looked down at Thomas, who had grabbed both our hands in his tiny fists, holding us together. And what is happening? I think we're falling in love. I think maybe we've been falling for weeks and we've been too scared or too proper to admit it. She laughed, wiping her eyes. You're not supposed to fall in love with the nanny, it's a cliché. Life is a cliché sometimes, that doesn't make it any less real. Grace was quiet for a long time, just looking at me, at Thomas, at the life we'd built together in this house that had been so dark just a few months ago. I can't promise you forever, she said finally. I'm older than you, my forever might be shorter. Then we'll make the most of however long we have. People will judge. Your friends, your family, the society pages that used to write about you and Caroline. Let them. The only opinions that matter are in this room. Thomas might not understand, might think I'm trying to replace his mother. We'll help him understand. We'll make sure he knows that loving you doesn't mean forgetting Caroline, that there's enough room in our hearts for both." Grace looked at me for another long moment. Then she leaned in and kissed me soft and sweet, while Thomas babbled happily between us. When we pulled apart, she was smiling. "This is crazy, probably, completely inappropriate timing, definitely, against every professional boundary I've ever maintained. Absolutely, I love you too." And just like that, everything changed again. But this time it changed for the better. We took it slow. We didn't tell anyone at first, just let ourselves explore this new dynamic in private. Grace moved from the third floor to the second, into the guest room across from mine. We had family dinners every night. We took Thomas to the park on weekends, and people probably assumed we were just a nanny and employer, but we knew different. Patricia called a week later to apologize again, more formally this time. She asked if she could visit Thomas regularly, really visit, not just try to take him. I said yes, and Grace was gracious about it, even making sure Patricia felt included in Thomas's routines. "You're kinder than I would be," I told her after one of Patricia's visits. "She lost her daughter," Grace said simply. "I understand that pain, and Thomas needs his grandmother, all of his grandmothers." It took me a moment to realize what she meant. "Grace, my mother's been dead for 5 years." "I know, I meant me," she smiled. "If we're doing this, building a family together, then I'm Thomas's grandmother as much as Patricia is, maybe not by blood but by love. And he needs all the love he can get." 3 months later, on a cold February afternoon, I asked Grace to marry me. We were in the living room playing with Thomas when I just suddenly knew it was time. "Marry me," I said. Grace looked up from where she was helping Thomas stack blocks. "What, marry me? I know we said we'd take it slow, but why? Life's too short, Grace. You know that as well as I do, so marry me. Be Thomas's mother officially, not just in every way that matters. Let me spend whatever time we have left making you as happy as you've made us." She laughed, crying at the same time. "You don't have a ring. I'll buy you a dozen rings. Say yes first. What will people think? I don't care, do you?" She looked at Thomas, who was watching us with his serious eyes, Caroline's eyes. Then she looked at me. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." We got married 2 months later. A small ceremony in our living room with just close friends and Thomas, who was 9 months old and trying to crawl. Patricia was there, and Jeremy, both of them having genuinely apologized for their actions. Grace's sister came from Georgia, and my few remaining friends from college. It wasn't the society wedding Caroline and I had. There were no 500 guests or ice sculptures or mentions in the New York Times. Just 20 people who loved us, standing in the room where we'd fallen in love, witnessing us promise to build a life together. When the minister asked if anyone objected, there was a long pause. I saw Jeremy shift uncomfortably, saw Patricia dab at her eyes, but no one spoke. Then, by the power vested in me, the minister said, smiling, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." I kissed Grace, and Thomas squealed, and everyone applauded, and I felt something I hadn't felt since Caroline died. Complete, not because Grace replaced Caroline, she didn't and she never would. Caroline would always be my first love, Thomas's birth mother, the woman who taught me what real partnership looked like. But Grace was my second chance. My proof that life goes on, that love doesn't diminish when it's shared, that families can be built in unexpected ways. That evening, after all the guests had left, Grace and I sat with Thomas in the nursery. He was finally asleep, exhausted from all the excitement. "Tell me something," Grace said softly. "When you first saw me that day I interviewed, what did you think?" I was quiet for a moment, remembering. "I thought you weren't what I expected." "And what did you expect? Someone younger, someone who would do exactly what I said without question, someone who wouldn't challenge me or make me uncomfortable." I looked at her. "Someone forgettable," Grace smiled. "And what do you think now?" "I think you're the most unforgettable person I've ever met. I think I almost missed the best thing that ever happened to us because I was too blind and proud to see what was right in front of me." I think I stopped, overcome with emotion. What? I think my mother would have loved you, and I think Caroline would be happy that Thomas has you, that we both have you. Grace leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat there in comfortable silence, watching our son sleep. Marcus, thank you for seeing me, really seeing me. I kissed the top of her head. Thank you for staying, for not giving up on us when we didn't deserve it. You deserved it, you just didn't know it yet. And maybe that was the truth of it all. Maybe I had deserved grace, deserved this second chance at happiness, deserved to be loved and challenged and pushed to be better. Maybe we all deserve those things if we're brave enough to accept them when they come. 5 years have passed since that day. Thomas is 6 now, in kindergarten, smart and kind and so full of joy. He calls Grace Mama Grace and talks about his first mama in heaven with a matter-of-factness that breaks my heart and heals it at the same time. We had another baby 2 years ago, a daughter we named Caroline Grace Wellington, and yes, Patricia cried when we told her the name. Grace is 65 now, still beautiful, still the strongest person I know. We've talked about her retiring, maybe traveling, but she just laughs and says she's got too much living left to do. Besides, she told me last week, who else is going to keep you humble? She's right, of course, she's always right. Sometimes I think about that Tuesday morning when I almost sent her away, when I was too proud and hurt to see the gift standing in my living room. I think about how easily I could have destroyed the best thing that ever happened to my family. And I'm grateful. Grateful for Mrs. Henderson's insistence that I give Grace a chance. Grateful for Grace's patience with a broken, grieving man who didn't know what he needed. Grateful for a love that came when I wasn't looking for it, that healed wounds I didn't know how to name. People still talk sometimes. I hear the whispers at company events, see the curious looks when Grace and I are out with the kids, but I've learned not to care. Because every morning I wake up next to someone who chose to love me despite all my flaws. Every evening I come home to laughter and chaos and a family that was built not on expectation but on grace, the concept and the woman. My mother used to say that God works in mysterious ways. I never really understood what she meant until Grace Davis walked into my life carrying her dignity like a crown and her love like a gift. She saved us. Not by being perfect, but by being exactly who she was, by refusing to be diminished, by loving my son when I was too lost in grief to do it well, by seeing the man I could be and patiently waiting for me to become him. And if that's not a miracle, I don't know what is. The secret that left me speechless wasn't a scandal or a scheme. It was simpler and more profound than that. It was the secret that love doesn't run out, that families can be built in ways we never imagined, that sometimes the people we underestimate are exactly the ones who change our lives. Grace taught me that. She's still teaching me that every single day. And I'm still learning, still grateful, still amazed that I get to spend my life loving someone who saw me at my worst and loved me anyway. That's the real story. Not about a CEO and his employee, but about two broken people who found wholeness in each other. About a child who got two mothers instead of one. About a family built not on biology or expectation but on choice and love and grace. Always grace.